The moment my mother-in-law raised her finger and pointed at me in front of nearly 40 people, I made a decision that changed my life forever. The curious thing is that no one noticed that moment. There were no shouts, no threats, just that dangerous silence that appears when a man stops arguing and starts planning his exit. My name is Joseph Taylor. I was married to Catherine for 11 years. During those 11 years, I was the man who was always available. I repaired her parents' basement when it flooded. I drove 3 hours in the middle of the night to take her sister Zoe to the airport. I attended every family gathering, one after another, without making a single excuse. Over time, I understood that they had mistaken my patience for weakness. Welcome back to that sweet revenge. Make yourselves comfortable because in this story, everyone thought they had control until they discovered that the quietest man was the one holding the final move. It all began during the annual Whitmore family reunion at a lake house in rural Tennessee. A beautiful, quiet place, far from everything. The perfect setting for a vacation or a family disaster. Catherine had been excited for weeks. This year will be different, Joseph. Everyone wants to see you. I smiled without arguing. I knew that wasn't entirely true. We arrived on a Friday afternoon. The drive had been wonderful. Music, open windows, and Catherine's hand resting on mine. At that moment, I thought our marriage was fine. If I had known what awaited me, I would have turned around before we arrived. The first to greet us was Zoe. She ran toward us laughing and practically threw herself into my arms. Finally, you're here. She had always been the only person in that family with whom I truly felt comfortable. Then the others appeared. My in-laws, Evelyn and Richard, Amber, Catherine's older sister, along with her husband Bennett, the younger brother, several cousins, uncles, and relatives I barely remembered, and of course, Dylan, Catherine's cousin, who had gone years without holding a steady job, but always acted as if the world owed him something. I greeted everyone politely. 11 years of attending those reunions had made me an expert at smiling when I really didn't want to be there. Evelyn approached me. How nice that you came. She said it with a smile so cold that it seemed directed at a stranger. She patted my arm, like someone checking an old piece of furniture before deciding if it still works. I had no idea that would be the kindest gesture she would give me all weekend. The problem with disrespect is that it rarely arrives all at once. It starts with small details, so small that anyone could tell you that you're exaggerating. The next morning, we all had breakfast on the terrace. Evelyn served coffee one by one. Richard, Amber, Hay, Bennett, Sydney, Dylan, Catherine. When it was my turn, she simply kept walking and went back inside the house. My cup remained empty. No one said a word. Hay avoided looking at me. Sydney pretended to concentrate on her breakfast. Catherine didn't even notice. I stood up silently, went into the kitchen, and poured my own coffee. It was just a cup of coffee, but it wasn't the first time they had made me feel invisible. That afternoon, the men were talking near the dock. Richard mentioned that he had a drainage problem on the property and asked if anyone could help him. He looked at Hay, looked at Bennett, even looked at Dylan. I intervened calmly. If you want, I can take a look at it. I fixed the basement a few years ago. Richard responded as if I had never opened my mouth. I think Hay has more experience. I just nodded. It was at that moment that I decided I would never offer my help to that family again. That night, we all had dinner around a huge table illuminated by hanging lights. The place was beautiful. The atmosphere, not so much. Zoe sat next to me, poured me another drink, and whispered, "Are you okay?" I smiled perfectly. She watched me for a few seconds. She knew I was lying. The conversation moved between sports, properties, and family gossip until Dylan decided to get attention. Joseph, Catherine says your company is growing quite a bit. I replied calmly, We're doing well. He tilted his head. What exactly was it that you did? Property management. The whole table fell silent. He knew perfectly well what I did. Everyone knew. For 4 years, I had built a commercial property management company with over a dozen employees and dozens of buildings under our management. Yet he pretended not to remember. Like mowing lawns and those things, Dylan said with contempt. Amber let out a small laugh, not very loud, just enough to show which side she was on. Then I looked at Catherine. I waited for her to say something, anything, but she just kept cutting her food as if she hadn't heard anything. In that instant, I understood something. Dylan's words weren't what hurt the most. What really hurt was my wife's silence. The next day, the atmosphere seemed calm, but I could already feel that something was being prepared. After lunch, I was helping Bennett put away some folding tables when Amber approached me. "Joseph, can we talk for a moment?" God. Bennett gave me an uncomfortable look and walked away without saying anything. Amber crossed her arms. She had been waiting all weekend for that moment. "I want to be honest with you," she said. "I think you deserve that." I should have left at that moment. Instead, I replied, "I'm listening." She took a deep breath. "Catherine isn't happy." I waited. "She's been trying to hide it for a while, but we all notice. She's tired, stressed, and we believe that much of it is your fault." I didn't raise my voice, I just asked, "Why do you think that?" She began listing an endless list: that I worked too much, that I never connected with the family, that I was distant with her parents, that I always seemed uncomfortable at gatherings. As she spoke, I understood that this wasn't an impromptu conversation. It was a speech prepared long ago. When she finished, I nodded calmly. "Thank you for telling me what you think." And I walked away. I found Catherine alone by the lake. I sat down next to her. Amber just spoke to me. She didn't seem surprised. "I know." I looked at her. "And you weren't going to warn me?" She was silent for a few seconds. Then she said something I will never forget. "Joseph, Amber isn't completely wrong." I felt a void in my chest. "You really think that?" "You work too much. My family feels that you never really wanted to be part of us." I breathed slowly. "Your mother forgot to serve me coffee in front of everyone." "It was probably an oversight." I stared at her. It wasn't an oversight. For the first time in 11 years, I saw something different in her eyes. It wasn't anger. It was distance. As if she had already started taking their side. "Maybe if you made a little more effort," I interrupted her calmly. "I've been doing it for 11 years. She didn't reply. She just looked back at the lake. In that instant, I understood that although we were still married on paper, my marriage was already over. An hour later, I came out of the guest room and found almost the entire family gathered on the porch. No one was talking. They were all waiting for me. Evelyn stepped forward with a glass of iced tea in her hand. I looked at Catherine. She was standing next to Amber. She didn't even try to come near me. Over the next few minutes, I listened as they judged me in front of the entire family. They talked about respect, family unity, and how much they had supposedly tried to include me. Richard nodded. Amber added comments. Dylan remained eating as if he were watching a show, and Catherine stayed silent. Finally, Evelyn pointed toward the entrance of the property. "You have two options." The entire family stood still. "You can apologize to us for the way you've treated us, or you can leave." No one said a word. I looked at Catherine one last time. She was still staring at the ground. I waited a few seconds. Nothing. Then I smiled. That smile disconcerted everyone. "Thank you, Evelyn." She frowned. "Thank you?" "Yes. Thank you for making everything so clear." I went into the house, went straight to the room, took out my phone, and opened the airline app. 3 taps. A flight from Nashville to Chicago was leaving that same afternoon. I bought a one-way ticket. It wasn't an impulsive reaction. It was the decision I had been making inside for years. As I packed my clothes, Zoe appeared at the door. "Joseph, what are you doing?" "Packing." She entered quickly. "Please, talk to them. This can still be fixed." I shook my head. "No, Zoe, it's already over." Her eyes began to fill with tears. "I am so sorry." I smiled sadly. "You didn't do anything wrong." I hugged her. It was a goodbye that neither of us had expected to live through. Before leaving, I said, "You were always the only person in this family who treated me with respect." She burst into tears. I took my suitcase and walked toward the exit. When I crossed the yard, everyone was still on the porch. The silence was absolute. Evelyn watched me, confused. "Are you really leaving?" I replied with complete serenity. "You gave me 2 options. I chose a third." Bennett was the only one who tried to stop me. "Joseph, don't do this." I looked at him. "I wish you the best." Then I looked at Catherine. Her face was completely pale. She seemed convinced that I would end up apologizing. I didn't. I just said her name one last time. Catherine. Nothing more. I got in the car, started the engine, and left that place without looking in the rearview mirror. There was no need. I knew perfectly well that no one was going to run after me. On the way to Nashville, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. First Catherine, then Amber, then Evelyn, Catherine again. Several messages also arrived. Where are you? We need to talk, please. This is insane. I read the last message while waiting at a traffic light. It only said one word. Please. But it didn't sound like regret. It sounded like someone annoyed that things weren't going as they expected. I left the phone face down on the passenger seat. I kept driving to the airport. While waiting for my flight, I understood something that would change the rest of my life. I wasn't escaping from that family. I was freeing myself from them. I landed in Chicago that same night and went straight to my office. There, I had a small apartment that I used when work stretched late. I sat in silence for several minutes and, instead of calling Catherine, I called my lawyer. She answered almost immediately. Joseph, what happened? I just replied. I need to know exactly where I stand if I decide to end my marriage. After hearing the whole story, there was a brief silence. Finally, she said, If you act now, you're in a very solid position. What Catherine never knew was that I had been carefully organizing my financial affairs for over a year, not because I wanted a divorce, but because I had begun to notice small cracks in our marriage. My company was properly structured, the main assets were protected, everything was documented. It was the habit of someone who had built a business from scratch and knew that everything important had to be in writing. On Tuesday, the divorce petition was officially filed. Catherine received the documents a few days later. My phone exploded with calls. I didn't answer any of them. I only sent her one message. You were on the wrong side when I needed you most. She called immediately. This time I answered. Joseph, what are you doing? What I had to do. Are you going to destroy our marriage over a family argument? I breathed calmly. It wasn't an argument. It was 11 years of contempt. And on the day I needed you most to speak up for me, you chose to stay silent. She started crying. We can fix this. No, Catherine, we could have fixed it a long time ago. I heard voices in the background. I recognized Evelyn's. Then I understood that even at that moment she was still surrounded by the same influence that had destroyed our marriage. This isn't over yet, she said. I replied calmly. For me, it already is. I hung up. Contrary to what many imagine, I never spent nights regretting it. I slept in peace. I focused again on my company. While others argued, I worked. While they looked for people to blame, I built my future. The messages kept coming. Amber wrote several times. Bennett sent me a short one. I never thought we would get to this. I only replied, me neither. Zoe was the only person I stayed in touch with. One day she called me. How are you? Better than I expected. She paused for a few seconds. Joseph. I should have said something that day. I smiled sadly. Yes, you should have. I didn't say it with resentment, only with honesty. The divorce proceeded over several months. It wasn't simple. There were shared assets and a significant house to negotiate. But my company remained protected thanks to all the prior planning. When I finally walked out of the last meeting with the lawyers, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. I hadn't won a battle. I had regained my peace. Over time, the business kept growing. We incorporated new properties. I promoted employees who truly deserved it. I hired an operations director, and for the first time in a long while, I could enjoy free weekends. I also bought a new apartment in the city center, bright, quiet, with no painful memories. I learned from Zoe that Evelyn kept telling everyone that I was ruined, that my company was headed for failure, and that sooner or later I would come back regretful. The truth was exactly the opposite. While they invented stories, I kept moving forward. 18 months later, I attended a real estate conference in Nashville. During a reception, I saw Hay, Amber's husband. Our eyes met. He walked over slowly. Joseph, you look great. I am. He lowered his gaze. I want to apologize to you. I never agreed with what happened that weekend. I watched him for a few seconds. But you were there, he nodded. Yes. And you didn't say a single word. He didn't try to justify himself, he only replied, I know. For a few years I would have accepted that apology immediately, but that man no longer existed, I replied politely. I appreciate you saying that, but an apology when it costs nothing doesn't change what happened. I wished him a good night and kept walking. I felt no rage, no satisfaction, only peace. Because I discovered something that changed the way I live. Choosing yourself doesn't always mean raising your voice. Sometimes it means packing your suitcase in silence, buying a one-way ticket, ignoring the calls, and building a life where you no longer have to ask for permission to be respected. They believed I only had two options, apologize or leave. But they never understood what the third option really was. The third option was to never come back. For years, they tried to make me invisible. The day I decided to leave, they were the ones who disappeared from my life. And that was the only revenge I truly needed. The end.